And we're off. I'm a little high. Let's put this down. Not like I'm sober. I meant the head height. Hi, everybody. How are you doing? It is the 11th of July, 2024. This is episode, I think, 212 of my live chat. My name is Luke Thomas. Appreciate you joining me. On the docket today, let's see. Bit of a quiet week, but we got UFC Denver. That's sitting out there. That should be something. There's some fun matchups on the Denver card. It's not like it's nothing going on there, but there's that. Let's see. There's Whittaker and Strickland kind of conversation happening. There is, what's Shakur Stevenson doing? Going after everybody on Twitter. And then Hamzat apparently stealing from people. Fun times. So thumbs up if you're watching. Appreciate it. Subscribe if you haven't. Thanks for joining me, everyone. I really am excited for today's program. And so without further ado, let's get this party started. Okay. All right. Let's see if my door's locked before my daughter gets home from summer camp. It is. We should be good to go. Trying to think if there's any other housekeeping notes. I don't think so. Oh, this video up yesterday. Boy, you would have thought I told people that there's no, or told little kids that there's no Santa Claus or something, because I tried to tell people that the movie Gladiator is good, not great, and they're like, "Oh, it's one of the, it's a 10 out of 10, fantastic movie." I'm like, it's a superhero movie. It's a good movie. It's not a bad movie. It's a good movie. It's a superhero movie. It's the characters are static. The plot is thin. The struggle is basic. It's a superhero movie. But in any case, I put up a response to people going absolutely fucking bonkers at me. You can get that if you're a member. If you're a member, that's available to you there. And folks have asked, because I had expressed previously that I wanted to see Princess Mononoke. I was supposed to do that this week, but then this whole thing popped off, and I was like, well, I had to kind of go back and rewatch Gladiator. It was good. I definitely enjoyed it. It was good upon rewatch. It's a very rewatchable movie. It's just not great. It's not great. Great movie making is there's many tiers above that, but it ain't that. It ain't that. I think if you think it is, you haven't seen it in a while, or you just don't appreciate that the characters are, nothing changes about them. They are utterly static. They are avatars for basic kind of, honorability, courage, good, bad. Everything's binary. It really is not a very interesting or complex universe. It's a fun one. Like, you can't take that from it at all. Action is good, not great. A lot of heavy cutting between scenes or during the scenes themselves to make the action seem more real than it is. It's a good movie. It's not a great movie. And I think anyone who tells you that it's great, probably a simpleton. I don't know that for a fact, but probably, right? There's a decent chance. Like, if you think like that's really great, probably a simpleton, but hard to say for sure. All right. With that out of the way, you know how this works. We'll go for about an hour on the free questions. I put up a thread yesterday on the community section here at youtube.com/Luke Thomas. You guys fill it up, and then afterwards, if you want to, you're certainly under no pressure to do that. You can fill in any question with the super chat, put in a donation there, unless you're a member, in which case you can do that for free. All right, there we have it. With that in mind, let's get to this part of the story. Let me refresh this so we can get the latest one. Okay, all right, let's do it. Add that to the thing. Let's do it this way. Okay. With Alex Pereira's recent tear in the UFC, how much more do you think he needs to accomplish before he's in the conversation for top 5 all time? Probably a lot. Well, he hasn't been in each division long enough to be considered the GOAT in any single one. True. Collectively, and especially if he somehow captures the heavyweight title too, wouldn't that place him among the all-time greats? So 2 things I would say to this. One, somebody pushed back on me fairly, I think, last week when I was like, where does he rank among like all-time combat sports athletes from Brazil? Would he be at the top? And certainly he would be a prominent figure, but I didn't quite have him in that top 3, top 5. And then folks pointing out, well, like, if you can actually count as kickboxing, then it changes the conversation a little bit, which is true. If we're talking just MMA, I definitely don't think that's true. But if we're talking the sort of the broader whole combat sports, right, was the original question. I had interpreted it as MMA, But they're right. If you bring it up as kickboxing, it changes the equation a little bit. I just want to point that out. So there was a fair kind of challenge there. To answer this particular question, I would have to, I mean, you're talking about the guys. I mean, your top five again in no particular order. Your Jones, your GSP, your Silva, your Demetrius, your Aldo. You could put Fedor, however you want to arrange that 6 to 7 to 8 spot. You're talking about guys who have significant number of title wins. He's not. I would have to check the numbers exactly, and I don't mean just like consecutive defenses. I mean just wins in title fights. He's not quite there yet. So, how many would he have to have? Now, if he gets a third title in the weight class where now you become the first one to do that, well, that does change it. Then you don't necessarily have to have anything even approximating the same numeric total, because now the qualitative total is much higher. So that would be a really interesting moment in where you would put him there, especially if he actually didn't end up having that many title wins relative to guys inside the top 4, top 5. But then he had the 3 belts. That would actually make the conversation really kind of crazy. Although you would have to put him, it would be game changing for him to do that, obviously. But assuming he doesn't do that, and we're asking how many wins he can get between 185 and 205, he's got some work to do. I respect the hell out of what he's doing. We all do. But we have to respect the body of work that we're talking. I mean, we're talking about the very best to do it. That's a very high bar. We should have a very strong screen in place to make sure that we're not allowing anybody in that space. What he's doing right now is he's on fire. It's incredible. There's still a fair amount of work to do. Can you see this? No, let me put it up a little bit. There you go. On MK, you made a joke about being a failure. Can you expand on why you feel that way? Well, I'm mostly joking, but do you have any regrets about committing to the combat sports career path? Sure. I've been following your work since the Bloody Elbow days, and I've always admired what you provide to combat sports fans. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks for everything, Luke. So it's mostly a joke. I mean, listen, I've been around a little bit of time, and there's many things that I never thought I'd be able to do, and I've done in many, many ways. I've completely gone much further than I ever thought possible. Again, when I got into this, half the jobs you see now never even existed. No, not half. 95% of them never existed. There just wasn't this, and I was able and extremely fortunate and lucky and better than, all but a fucking couple. I've done better than I've not done better than Ariel, but I've done better than just about everybody. That's not quite true. There's people now on TV that have done much better on the television side than I ever did. But I've done well. So in that sense, no, not really. I'm quite proud of what I've done. The problem for me is that there have been a couple of career hurdles that I've been unable to get past. That's kind of the thing that's always kind of bugged me. There's just been a couple of things that, were long-term projects to work on that I've basically made no headway towards. That has been frustrating, to put it mildly. So no, I mean, I'm mostly joking about that. Like I feel very confident in my resume. My resume will stand up against just about anybody's in this business. It's not that. It's these lingering issues I can't ever seem to solve has been a bit of a problem for me. In answering your other question, do you ever have regrets about committing to the combat sports career path? Well, I mean, yes and no. On the one hand, I'm incredibly fortunate to be here doing this. I'm incredibly fortunate to work in something that I have loved for a very long time. And I'm incredibly fortunate to have done reasonably well in that space. Like, all of that has been an absolute blessing for me, for my family, for everything. It has changed my life. Like, I'm so thrilled that I was able to do that. On the other hand, I've kind of always been a little black sheepish in the industry. I've always been. If you go back to the room service diaries that we did on MK with Chael, and this was before Chael hosted the Anderson Silva and Jake Paul presser in LA. We did a room service diaries with him. Go back to what he said on that. At the time, I didn't think much of it, but it kind of really resonated with me that he was saying, like, oh, now the industry is giving you awards, but this was an industry that didn't want you. He's right. He's right. For a long time, I don't think I probably still doesn't, but for a long time it didn't. It was just a weird, odd fit, and it will always be a weird, odd fit. Like, I don't see eye to eye on any number of things. And I know with the rest of the people in the industry. And a lot of people think that's just like inherently political, but it's really not. There's significantly more to that. Like even on sort of like basic things about tastes in various works of pop culture art, like this whole Gladiator thing. Like it's objectively not a great movie, right? I mean, it's paper thin plot, utterly static characters, insanely fun and rousing, and this sort of, the orchestra all working. I mean, the score, the whole 9 yards. There's a lot to really enjoy about it, but it's like clearly not a great movie, right? And some of that is semantic categorization. Like I'm not putting anything else above great. I'm not putting like, oh, there's great, then there's elite, then there's super elite. Like great is really sort of, for me, there's tiers within that, but that's like the highest level of movie. It encompasses a very high degree of movie making, including but not limited to the very highest. So some of that is semantic categorization. Like there could be on another person's thing, but I'm just pointing out, like I often I'm at odds with people on anti-doping. I'm at odds with people. And again, long term, I feel like I was very vindicated in that, but it doesn't matter. Like nobody remembers that. Nobody cares. So that part has been incredibly frustrating to always kind of be. And then people were like, then the problem is people were like, they turn it into a bit, it's like, oh, you're doing that on purpose. I'm like, I fucking wish I was. I fucking wish I could turn this off. But I can't. So at least, not completely anyway. So that's a little bit always caused some internal friction. But the way I would answer that question is like, on balance, where are we with this? On balance, I feel like it was a very good decision. I guess we'll see how it pays off going forward. But not everything is an always good. Not everything is an always bad. Most of life is just like this. Did it work out on balance? Did it not work out on balance? It has worked out on balance. All right. What do you think the UFC is going to do about the lightweight title now that Arman is suspended and Islam typically fights in Abu Dhabi, though this year he mentioned he wants to fight at MSG? No, that's not going to be a problem. Do you think they'll push back the next title fight until Arman is back? Well, maybe, but will they give it to someone else in the meantime? Doubt it. I've seen Oliveira and Chandler mentioned as possible contenders. I mean, it's always possible, but remember, he could do the PSA, the anti-bullying PSA, and then he'll be ready basically by late October. I think they'll probably just go with that. If they have to move it to MSG, they might, but the taxes are really high there, so that always complicates it. But I generally don't. I think it'll be fine. This may have been asked before, but how do you personally reconcile with the long-term damage and brain trauma fighters endure? Every so often, the damage fighters go through really weighs on me. Did you guys see the video? So I don't know who put it together, of Nam Fan. There was like videos like 2007, 2011, sounding pretty coherent, pretty great. And then you listen to him. I think some of the videos were recorded in 2022, so just 11 years after, where he sounded, totally normal. Basically, he sounds incontestably diminished. And like, how do you reconcile that? We've been over this kind of conversation a number of times. The answer is really not that complicated. For some people, there is no reconciliation. It's something you would not want to ever allow. I think you have to just kind of start, for me, with a very basic but libertarian kind of look at it, which is, if you can't fist fight for money in a cage or a boxing ring, and I don't mean if you have like some kind of medical condition or men versus women, I'm talking about just sort of under normal regulated circumstances. If you can't even do that, you really can't do anything. This is a very basic kind of, I don't know if freedom is quite the right word, but allowance that the government does not have a compelling interest in prohibiting. It has a compelling interest in regulating it, and much more so than we get, but it doesn't have a compelling interest in completely forbidding it. And even then, you can't really forbid it. And if you try to forbid it, it actually gets more dangerous. Now, you actually grow damage by allowing it and professionalizing it, because it becomes bigger and more people get attracted to it. But you, in theory, and probably in practice too, you eliminate some of the worst excesses by inviting the government in to regulate it. That's sort of a basic way of understanding it. That's the first thing I'd say. And then you might be asking, well, how can you really, like this kind of a thing? Well, aside from the government being allowed to, and frankly, a required party in this country, certainly, to regulate it, the answer is that the conflict itself is engrossing to watch, right? We're talking about fights. Do I need to tell you how engrossing they are? They've taken over my life. The competitors want to do it. There are ways to do this in the short run quite safely. What I do think is missing is not so much like, does this cause long-term damage? What's missing to me is just stricter regulation. That to me is the part that really goes with it. But like the individual damage that they might take, like concussive blows or, you know, years of facial lacerations, because it's not just traumatic brain injury, but although that's what you're referencing. These are not inevitable consequences necessarily of doing it. They are inevitable consequences of the way in which we do it. And I realize you have to accept the sport as it is versus how you want it to be. But that doesn't mean we ever have to relent to it and say that this is good enough. It is not good enough. This is not nearly good enough. That's why you see things like California developing pension funds for boxers, pension funds for MMA fighters, why there are renewed calls for a federal commission. Those really won't go anywhere at the present moment, but there's really never, there's never a reason to just take your eye off the ball about the importance of regulation. This is also why I have spent the majority of my career, or big portions of it, trying to highlight fighter pay, because that does not solve the problem, but it mitigates some of the harms long term. It makes it easier for guys to get in and get out potentially, or to have some kind of resources to take care of themselves later. The point I'm trying to make is we live in a world that people should be allowed, if they want to. I don't encourage it. We have to be careful about it. We have to regulate it. We have to give them good information to make informed decisions, but that they end up hurting themselves both in the short and long run is not something that I think the government should prohibit. And if you can enjoy it for what it is in a regulated sense, I don't know why you should feel guilty about it. You should feel guilty about the parts that lead to the game's excess, the parts that lead to the game's truly destructive ends, the part that leads to enormous difficulty. That's for these guys long term. I think that's where you really have to focus your efforts. But is there something, I think, wrong with enjoying fist fighting? I don't think that there is. I just don't. I don't believe that you should be made to feel bad for that. I don't believe that you should be made in general that's something that's disreputable or indicative of some kind of mental problem. I don't think any of those things are true. I don't think the evidence bears that out. What it does bear out is that if you are going to allow it because you don't have a compelling interest in banning it, you have to regulate it effectively. We have done a very, very poor job of that. But it's like, gee, did you like this incredibly exciting thing that is unlike just about anything else you can find in the sports or entertainment world? How is that like... I don't even understand that. Not that you're framing it that way, but I don't even understand how people can even imagine that that's a thing. It's not for everybody, of course, but for those who it is for them deeply. It's a contest unlike any other. We just have to do it the right way. All right. Let's see here. I don't know how much you followed boxing during Floyd's career. A fair amount. But was there anyone he fought during his reign that you thought would beat him? Sort of. I was 12 years old when Floyd fought Canelo, and I was sure as heck Canelo was the one to beat him. After that fight, I never doubted Floyd and actually gained so much respect for him after hitting on his style for so long. Floyd actually taught me a very valuable lesson on never being too emotionally involved in one fighter or another, because the odds are they will lose at some point. Yeah. Did not expect the first Maidana fight to go that way. Thought Maidana had a shot. Wasn't sure about Pacquiao, but he shit the bed. But I kind of thought Pacquiao might have had a shot. Obviously not Berto. The Canelo fight, I didn't believe he was going to win because I just thought he was way too small and drained. It was never going to work. Shane Mosley rocked his shit. What was it, the first or second round? And I thought that was interesting, but then it all kind of fell apart. So, like, by the time I missed most of the Pretty Boy Floyd era is the problem. Like, Chop Chop gave him a hard time, right? Or at least for a brief moment gave him a hard time, and then he kind of surged back in that contest. You know, that was the time where you really could have seen someone potentially take it to him when he was certainly adopting more risk. You know, by the time he got a little bit later, it was a much more managed and careful affair. So I thought there was a couple of instances where guys could really get something going, but in general. By the time I got there, and also he just improved a lot. Like he really, and by improved, I don't just mean he had good defense. Like he really understood how to diagnose quickly, how to take away a guy's game, how to win rounds, how to manage a fight over the course of 12 rounds. Like he just really understood the whole process. And when you saw that up close, there's a lot of these guys, like the fans, have these really bad views of or impressions of, and not with plenty good reason. They were not appealing to them. Floyd's done horrible shit as a person, in his life. Like it's not to say there's no reason to dislike him, but then when you can keep all of that. I'm not even asking to discard it. But then when you just watch him operate up close and then you sort of understand the system in play, it doesn't necessarily take away the fact that the guy did like horrible shit as a person. It's not that, but that you understand, at least on the professional side, there's significantly more thought that goes into how he got himself to this position, both inside of the ring in very particular ways that has played a role, and then outside as well. It's all a very managed affair, and that's very difficult to do. But I missed the portion of his career where I think guys had a little bit more of a shot. Let's see here. All right, you have mentioned before that you would favor Tom Aspinall to beat Jon Jones if they matched up. I mean, I think I say that with great trepidation, as would I if they matched up now. I'm curious, though, how do you think Jon that fought DC, either in the first or the rematch, would have done this version of Aspinall? That's a different story. I acknowledge the amount of unknown variables makes it very hard to predict, yes, particularly due to Jon not being active at heavyweight at that time. I just think if Jon had gone up to heavyweight back then, he would have been a different beast than the sloppy, older, out-of-shape version coming off the layup that we saw versus Gane. It's a little strong, albeit still effective. Yeah, very hard to say, but basically what you're asking is like peak Jon Jones. Does even this version of Aspinall defeat peak Jon Jones if he were at heavyweight? Probably not. He had, phenomenal defense, great striking accuracy, good variation. He obviously had lights out wrestling, just the most dominant force. Like that guy was really, and I don't know to what extent that he still exists, but that version probably, is going to be tough to beat. It's going to be really, really tough to beat. Let's see here. Okay. Luke, are there any specific matchups you want to see the current champs have before they move up based on the style contrast alone, not just meritocracy? Okay, so for example, Islam versus Gamrot, I'm very curious about. Obviously, I'd highly favor Islam to win that, but I'm very intrigued to see how it might play. Oh, I see what you mean. Would it be several scrambles like Arman versus Gamrot, or would it be just Islam sprawl and brawl? I mean, I think Islam absolutely sprawls on him, right? If you're Islam and you have much better striking than Gamrot, and the wrestling could be a bit of a wash, why would you even try? And then you say Sean versus Corey is another one. So that's a great question. Oops, let me see here. That's a great question. I would say for Jon Jones, I mean, there's no way to move up, but I don't know how long he's going to be there. There's really not much. I mean, the Tom Aspinall one is the big one, or Poatan. Those are the two. For Poatan himself, it'd be Jones or Aspinall. So it's kind of like a triangle there of those guys. What about 185? What about Dricus? Anyone I would want to see him fight? We're going to get the Izzy one. We've seen the Rob one. We've seen the Strickland one. Some of those you could run back. I guess I'd be kind of curious to see if you can get a Hamzat or a Bo Nickel up at the top, but that seems very speculative right now. Leon's at 70. Everyone at 70, I would want him to fight. I mean, yeah, we got to get Rakhmonov in there. JDM, I think, is a fun one. He doesn't have to fight these guys. I'm simply saying if they were electing to move on per the question, those are ones I'd really, 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 really want to see. 55 for Islam. Gamrot would be a fun one. Arman would be, I mean, you get a lot of that with Arman. Hard to say. For Ilya, I mean, you could go in a number of different directions. There's so many fights I want to see him in, assuming he can keep winning. 35 for O'Malley. Same kind of thing. Like that division seems like there's Corey Sandhagen seems like that's one you really want to see, right? Whether we'll get there after August 3rd, I don't know. But there's always going to be one guy in the division who is not in place to win it or to even get the opportunity, and you probably wouldn't even favor, but because of some of the unique puzzles that they present, hey, how does he solve for them? For sure that they exist. It's just that I guess the biggest one for me would be like where Rachmanov fits into everything on 170, because he's not really at the top yet. He still has, I think, another win to go. But holy shit, I want to see that one. It seems Gane is hesitant to fight Almeida, understandably so, given their skill sets. That said, do you think UFC's desire for growing the French market will lead them to allow Gane to just wait for another title shot, similar to how they let Colby have a title shot or two he didn't deserve after also waiting? Unlikely. They'll probably want to keep him busy, but it is. So my answer is unlikely. And you're right. I personally hope not, but they gave him one versus John after only having one win after his loss to Francis. Yeah. Anytime that you command a international market of significance to the UFC, so there was a time when, and still to this day, if you had significant presence in the UK, if you have significant presence in Mexico for a time, if you had significant presence in Japan, this enabled you to paint outside the lines, so to speak, where you were able to get away with things that you ordinarily wouldn't. They're always going to want to have an incentive to put Gane in fights that he can win, and that would be good for the French market. How much they can really get away with that, how much he can actually wait, I don't think it lines up all that well. There's a lot of uncertainty in that division, and guys need to kind of stay active. So it doesn't seem to me like right now waiting works much better when you've got a big mandate, which the French market is a big one. Doesn't seem that big given where we're at overall as like a mandate. Let's see. There have been a few reports about Aljo. Some say Aljo versus Movsar. Others say Aljo versus Yair at the Sphere are being explored. Do you favor Aljo in either of those? Those are great fights, first of all. Initially, I kind of favored him versus Yair, but Yair is also one of the taller, bigger 145ers. If your Aljo's team is that fight you're pushing for, I mean, he probably wants anything that's going to get him to a title, right? Also, what the F happened to Josh Emmett? Him and Usman have not having fights booked in quite some time is a tad peculiar. Don't know the story on Josh Emmett and why he hasn't fought, but you're asking about Aljo versus Movsar and then Aljo versus Yair. I mean, Jesus Christ, wife. Yeah. The NATO summit, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, is here. They're having their giant fucking summit, and it has turned traffic in DC into absolute fucking gridlock. And my wife is telling me after leaving, a little bit on the late side to go get our daughter, that the traffic is insane. And I'm like, yeah, it is. Anyway, okay, Aljo versus Yair, I would favor Aljo. Aljo versus Movsar is a little harder to say. That's a little harder to say. You've got a guy who's physical at that weight class, good wrestling, good down blocking. Not super great scrambler, but pretty good. Not like elite scrambler, but good scrambler. Patient, control. It's a tough one. That's a toss up to me. That's a toss up, which is why I can understand why you might have a little bit of apprehension. The consequences of a Yair fight are worse if it goes bad. Like if it goes bad against Movsar, what's happening? You're probably going to lose 29, 28, 30, 27, maybe a worst case scenario. He would just kind of control you on route to a loss. The consequences of a loss to Yair in terms of what it could do are much worse. However, the rewards are still pretty big. And he has some grappling. He's got good grappling, but he's also got some deficiencies that a guy like Aljo could exploit, I think. The Movsar one's a tougher one. That's a tougher one. That's going to be a tough fight to win. And even if you manage to beat a guy like that, you have to beat him crazy impressive. And he's just hard to look good against. Really hard to look good against. So that's a tough one. If DDP beats Izzy, at that point, would you say his resume at 85 is better than Islam's at 55? DDP would have beaten the top 3 fighters in the division. Not many current champs can say that aside for maybe Alex. So you might be able to say that, which would be very, very impressive, especially if he finishes Izzy, because he didn't finish Sean, but he did finish Whittaker. If he finished Izzy, that would be crazy. On the other hand, the problem is this, like 155 is a better division. Like, I don't know who's the 185 equivalent of Charles Oliveira. Like, there isn't one. There is not one. There is not a guy like that at 185, and Islam blew the fucking doors off of him. So, you know what I mean? Like, it sounds like I'm undermining what it would mean to be the top 3 guys. That is sick, and something I would have never have seen coming. Not that I'm doubting it now, but like for sure, I did not believe he was going to beat Whittaker. And he did. He fucking marched him down and beat him up. So that would be impressive. That would be super, super impressive. But I'm just got a hard time comparing wins at 85, even very, very good ones. And those would be fantastic. It's a little hard for me to say. I mean, I'm not saying that, like, beating Whittaker is not better than beating Poirier, although that's still, yeah, Whittaker was a champ, but in terms of just like the level of differentiation and quality in their game, yeah, I'd probably rate the Whittaker one higher. But there's nobody on that that's like Oliveira. Nobody. So, but let's see what happens against Izzy. Someone's asking if I've ever considered doing a keto diet. No. I'm not calling it a fad diet, but like the basic body of evidence is pretty clear that like it's what you kind of expect it to be. Most things in moderation. You don't have to go all meat or, no carbs or only getting carbs from fruit or whatever the fuck. Like all of these sort of like ways in which you drastically alter what would basically be considered, for the most part, ordinary, frankly, normal ways of consumption seem silly and unnecessary. But if it works for people, then God bless it. I just don't have any interest. All right. Dustin Poirier was on the MMA Hour and mentioned having no downswing in emotions following his loss to Makhachev, unlike his KO loss to Gaethje. Could the down spiral be connected to the KO itself? Obviously. Not exclusively, but yes. Rogan doesn't like to interview fighters following KOs for this reason. That's not quite right. So if in the short term they seem to have such a big impact on mental health, the ramifications of long-term head trauma must be absolutely wild behind the scenes. The part of the reason why you don't want to interview a guy after he has been KO'd is that he's not all there, right? Remember, Stipe gets put out by, what am I saying? Overeem gets put up by Stipe, and he's like, Stipe tapped. He's saying this because he's not fucking all there. That's what's happening there. So that's more the reason that their brains are fucking scrambled. And yes, of course, the violence of the KO itself, both in terms of how it looks and how what it means for their career, and then the traumatic injury to the brain itself, all of those things absolutely exacerbate the circumstances. But you can absolutely go on downward spirals from losses that were competitive, or for any number of these guys live and die in their own mind. So it's really, yes, of course, physical factors of the fight itself can ratchet up the problem significantly. It can absolutely exacerbate it. On the other hand, it's more about what they're telling themselves in their mind and what this loss means and how they're interpreting it and processing it. And then that can have a significant impact just the same. And everyone's going to have different, sort of biological predispositions about what affects them and what doesn't, in what ways and what not. So yes, it's never really a binary. It's not an either or. It's not this or that. It's usually there's a series of factors, or the extent to which a factor exists, at what level that tends to drive some of these outcomes. Okay. Luke, I'd like to ask some questions pertaining to my wanderlust. All right, this dude wants to travel. I've recently been trying to pick up some Spanish using the Duolingo app. You can stop that now, with some hopes of traveling to Mexico, Costa Rica, Colombia spelled wrong, Panama and Spain in the next few years, with maybe some longer term goals of becoming an expat in a few years when I can pull my pension. I'll be 44 this year. Okay. I know you've spoken highly of some of these places. Do you have any advice on which ones would be the best to start, and any tips for really building a decent base in Spanish? Yeah, you can give up Duolingo now. You're not going to learn shit doing that. Fucking stop. You might learn a phrase or two, how to ask for a menu, where's the bathroom, how do you say window in Spanish, or any of those kind. You're not going to learn how to converse with another person in Spanish for any duration or amount of time. You're not going to learn enough vocabulary. It's not going to do shit for you. It won't work. It's not it. Dude, learning a language fucking sucks. It's hard, especially later in life. It's really hard, and I'm not good at it. But you should take a class if you actually want to get good in Spanish. You could probably get a little bit by on Rosetta Stone. I have found Rosetta Stone helps in a complementary way, not a supplementary way. But you have to speak to other native speakers. You have to practice with other speakers. You probably need to take a class, and you can do these online. You can do them in person. But if you actually want to learn a language, you have to do the hard and uncomfortable part of learning. And, just fucking around on an app, and it's like, oh, look at this owl. It says I've earned 3,000 points towards, jacking off in the mirror, or, whatever the fuck these stupid ass reward. It doesn't do anything. A buddy of mine just moved to Spain, and he did I think 2 years on the Duolingo app. And he's telling me it was absolutely worthless now that he's there. Didn't do shit for him. Nothing. Prepared him for absolutely zero. You should give that up immediately. Listen, if you want to do the Duolingo app as something else to add on to what you're doing because you have fun with it, then keep doing it. But is that your guide to learning Spanish? You will not learn Spanish. Let me assure you. And also, dude, various places you go, the accents change dramatically. The wording changes dramatically. You have to hear these. You have to encounter them. You have to sit in front of somebody from Honduras. You have to sit in front of somebody from Spain. You have to sit in front of somebody from, where did you list? Mexico, Costa Rica, Colombia. You have to hear this. And even inside these countries, the accents change all over the place. The Caribbean kind of Spanish, the Cuba, the north of Colombia, parts of Venezuela into Puerto Rico and all and whatnot. They have a different kind of sound completely than those closer to the Andean mountains or further. I mean, there's a gazillion different accents and different ways in which it's speaking and different intonations and speed. And you got to mix it up with them, bro. That's it. That's how you learn. There's really no other way. And that sucks because then you're like me, and you go to Pen Paja in Bogota, Colombia, and you order something and they make fun of you to your face. It fucking sucks. But Duolingo ain't gonna do shit. I went to Chick-fil-A today. It was good. All right. Another question on Sandhagen Umar. Yeah, people asking, do you think Umar is going to couldn't Umar out wrestle Corey? Yes. Probably the likeliest outcome is that Umar out wrestles Sandhagen. That might be the likeliest outcome. But if you're Corey Sandhagen, you must know that is going to, first of all, that's been a big weakness of his game that he has continuously worked on. It was a big problem against Jan. It was a big problem to a lesser extent, but it was still a problem against, for example, Dillashaw. And by the time he got to somebody like Song Yadong, or less so that one, but more like Cheeto or whatever, that was less of an issue. It was less of an issue. But the thing I'm going to point out is, yes, that is as real a possibility as it can get. You just have to know if you're Sandhagen, that he's going to be going for that. How do you not know that that's coming? Now, whether you can stop it, of course, is another matter. But this is a smart guy with a capable team, plenty of experience, elite contender experience. These are one of those moments where, if you're going to do this in this division, it's at this juncture where it happens. And so that by itself does not mean that he will get it done, but it does mean that somebody of this caliber who has this much experience and puts this much thought into the game and otherwise has all the requisite skills to win, it seems doable that he could get that he could win a fight like this. It seems more than doable. It seems that there's a probable path to victory. So I understand completely the concerns about wrestling with Umar. Like if on August 3rd, Umar wrestles him for 5 rounds, you'd be like, oh, right. But that would be quite the indictment on Sandhagen at that point if we were to get to that kind of place where, this far into his career, it's not like Umar is some fucking scrub, but that it's not like this is an unknown weakness either. There's a lot of guys who are just not bright enough or hardworking enough or with the right environment to really overcome these kinds of hurdles. Sandhagen's not that guy. He actually has the tools to get past this. So let's see if he can do it. Okay, this is a weird one. With Alex Pereira becoming the new poster child of the UFC, I do agree with that, and the Four Kings era at middleweight, are we living in a new golden era for UFC middleweight and light heavyweight divisions? Yeah, dude, light heavyweight has maybe never been worse. Light heavyweight has I saw someone debating this online this week. The light heavyweight division is not good. It's not good. It's real bad. It's arguably the worst it's ever been in the modern era. Understand something. When the Ultimate Fighter hit, okay, what was the big fight that launched it? Forrest Griffin, Stephan Bonner. What weight class was that? That was light heavyweight. Who were the coaches that season? Randy Couture and Chuck Liddell. What weight class was that? It was light heavyweight. Guys, at that time, circa 05, 06, a little bit before and a little bit after, 205 was the best division in the sport, the best division in the UFC, and not just the best division in the UFC. This is why this was important. It was also the best division. This is not quite true because they had a really strong heavyweight division at that time. You had Mirko, you had Keith Haring, you had Fedor, but it was arguably one of the strongest divisions, if not the strongest one in Pride simultaneously. Pride had Vanderlei, Dan Henderson. Obviously, he went back and forth, but it had Shogun, it had Ricardo Arona, it had Rampage, and other ones, Randleman. Simultaneously, UFC and Vitor Belfort kind of went back and forth to a degree, but it had Vitor, Tito, Chuck, Randy, Mike Van Arsdale. I mean, you could go on down the list, dude. It was fucking stacked beyond all belief. That was the preeminent division in the sport at that time. And it has absolutely faded, to a complete shell of itself. Now, that's not to say that Alex Pereira is not genuinely great. He's great, but he's great at a time when also there's just no denying it. The division is a cheap facsimile of what it once was. That's the reality. Again, how did Jon Jones get so good? Oh, he won all these fights. Right, but that's really not the full story. The full story is he went into what I would consider to be like the last gasp of 205 being, if not the best division in the sport, one of the best ones, and still very much a glamour division. And he just completely fucking decimated it. He sent all those legends out to pasture. Shogun, Rampage, and then Evans was a sort of a second generation version from that. But Evans, Machida, all just get the fuck out. Matt Yushchenko, Vera, I'll just get the fuck out. That's what that was so significant because he took what was the crown jewel for if you were a fan around this time, the crown jewel division in general had been at least and was still to a major extent 205. Jones came in and just fucking crushed it. Absolutely balled it up in his fist, crumbled it into dirt, and chucked it on the ground. That's why what he did was so big. Hard to imagine that now. Hard to imagine that even if you had a guy who won, oh, for the love of God. Oh, Jesus. Yeah, you get the idea. So if someone was around today and had that same amount of wins, you'd be like, wow, is this guy the GOAT? But it's like they wouldn't be doing what Jones did. They would not be doing that. John was beating titans of the sport. piece by piece, boom, 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 and making it look fucking easy, So are we in a golden era of light heavyweight? We're in one of the worst eras of light heavyweight. Middle is a little bit more complicated because obviously Anderson's reign was dramatic, but I still think that there is some additional parity now that is a little bit more interesting. And I do think some of the level overall among non-champions is a little bit higher. So that's a different question for 185, but 205 has never, that's not quite right. 205 has, for the most part, never looked worse. Okay. Luke, after watching your interview with Sean Brady and how he discussed how he doesn't train to physical deterioration anymore, it got me thinking about certain fighters like Chimaev and others known for, intensive training, but high rates of injuries and infections, right? Do you know how widespread the use of planned periodization within MMA is? I get the impression that younger fighters don't really implement it that much until they've put in some serious miles upon their body. Yes. If it's something underutilized, do you think it may grow more prevalent earlier in fighters' careers? Yeah, I mean, the better ones with better teams or better mentorship or better money do a better job with periodization, where you have these like structured blocks and segments in a training cycle that ramps up to a certain point, brings it back down, just so you can peak at the right amount of a moment. It gives you just enough volume and training to get out of it what you need, what you can recover from it. And I know I'm talking in sort of ways that sound like I'm lifting weights, but it has similar kind of principles involved. Yes, better ones do involve that. A lot of them don't do a whole lot of structure. It's just, I'm just going to do more, whatever you can do that, and then plus more. Whereas, let's think about this strategically. What do we really want to get out of this? What can we do to make sure we get to the finish line? How much are we actually getting from a benefit of doing more, right? And so, yes, I do think that is something that has been growing over time and will continue to. But young guys, and young women, obviously feel like they're invincible, and that any amount of volume, is more. If some volume is good, more volume is better. By the way, did you guys see TJ Dillashaw talking about his shoulder? I felt genuinely bad for him. Genuinely bad for him. So I guess he was on the Jackson podcast. I think that's how you pronounce it. They spell it a little funny, but he had talked about how he's having multiple surgeries and his shoulder's not getting any better. And I was like, again, May 2009, I had my labrum repaired, right? Everyone knows. Won't belabor the point. When he said at UFC 280, when he fought Aljo, that his shoulder had dislocated like a dozen plus times in camp, he couldn't even hit. Remember he said this? He couldn't even hit pads in the back because his shoulder was so fucked up, and he had to tell the referee, like, hey, if it pops out, like, don't let it go. Let me pop it back in. So I went back and I watched my UFC 280 post-fight show to talk about that, and I was talking about how like his shoulder won't be the same and there will be quality of life issues. This is, that wasn't exactly what he got mad at me for. He got mad at me for like a different kind of consideration, which was like, if you're that fucked up going into a fight that people are paying money to see and people are actually gambling on, this is a legitimate part of the business. Not that you have to like care about gamblers, but if you're not even able to perform at a basic function, this is a waste of everyone's time and frankly their money as well. And that to me was a big problem. This is really not about that, but it did remind me of something else, which is that like so many people talk about like sacrificing their body on the altar of athletic glory. And that is so fucking easy to do when you're 25, even 30, and even to an extent 35. And, it's not like all wisdom comes after the age of 40, but there is a fucking drop off in your body after that. And you have to live with the consequences of whatever it is that you do in that athletic life. Like that athletic life is going to end. It's going to end. It will come to a halt. And when it does, the bill will come due from all of that you have done to it. Like in that video, I went back and I said, I'm like, I don't know when he would ever come back. He's going to have long-term quality of life issues. And then sure enough, here we are. He should have never have been in that fight. He should have been getting medical attention. If your shoulder is coming out of the joint that often, You lose the fight, you don't get you don't get any win money, you don't get any bonus money, you're not going to get back to a title, they can't even get back to the octagon. And then on top of it, and I don't wish this upon him, dude, I really don't. Like, again, I've had shoulder surgery. It's no fun to recover from. But now you're going to have long-term quality of life issues. Was it worth it? Clearly it wasn't worth it. Clearly it wasn't worth it. I feel bad for him, man. Like, you could be like, oh, well, he made his own decision. Dude, these guys all make these hyper-competitive decisions. I don't know what the people around him were telling him, but whatever it was, if it was anything about not competing, it was not very convincing. And I don't even know that they were even doing that. And now I look at it, I'm like, dude, it didn't have to be this way. It did not have to be this way. If your shoulder is coming out of the joint, I think it was upwards of 20 times in camp, you cannot hit pads in the background. He catches one to kick, and on the first takedown attempt, it pops right out. This should not have happened. It should not have happened. And now, unfortunately, he's in a stage where he can't get right and can't get healthy. And it just didn't need to be this way, man. I fucking feel for him. It didn't need to be this way. Luke, I don't know if you noticed, but when Sean Brady was talking about his coaches, how his coaches are black belts under Mikey Musumeci, and how that gave him the confidence to go against Gilbert on the ground, but Musumeci is a black belt under Gilbert Burns. Yeah, okay, but there's a lot of like separation in lineage, I mean, that doesn't mean much. That doesn't, I mean, yes, obviously Mikey getting his black belt from Gilbert, it connotes that he got it from a legit guy, but Mikey's got his own grappling identity, and then anybody he gives that to is going to have their own grappling identity as well. This is just a quality control measure that you're looking at. It doesn't mean that there's like some kind of inside baseball that they all know, and then therefore the grappling won't work. If the grappling doesn't work, it's because Gilbert found a way to make it work in real time, not because they're all playing by the same. Oh, I know what the Dolphins are going to do on Sunday because I know all their plays. It's not really how it goes. I'm not suggesting you're saying that, but I can imagine other people might. Same question about Max and Islam. Didn't we go over this last week or no? In a recent interview, Yuri Prochazka's coach said that a move down to middleweight might be in the cards. How do you think he would do against the top four in the division? DDP, Izzy, Strickland, and Whittaker. I fucking hate this idea. I absolutely cannot stand this idea at all. How is it possible you can look at what happened? You get 2 cracks against Alex Pereira and you got wiped out both times. How is it possible you can look at that? Let me pull up his stats. I want to see this. Now, it's not to say that he's not successful. He's enormously successful. That's not my problem. My problem is his fucking numbers. His strikes absorbed per minute is 5.59. Guys, I cannot possibly tell you how high that is. That's not the highest I've seen. Like, Gaethje's got a worse number, I think. Gaethje's got a much worse number. In fact, now that I'm curious, it used to be like in the 7s or 8s. Let me see what his is. Just a Gaethje fight. What is Gaethje's? His is high. It's still in the 7. Jesus. 7.46. It's fucking high. Like, so this is not the highest I've seen. It gets worse. But 5.59 for a championship quality fighter is fucking high. He gets hit a lot. And it's not like his wrestling is lights out. His takedown accuracy is 60%, which is relatively speaking kind of high. But look at who he's trying to take down. He still has some issues against guys who don't have like stout wrestling defense. Okay. He has a deficient skill set. That's the problem. He is plenty big for 205. He is plenty physical for 205. He is plenty athletic. And by the way, but for Alex Pereira, he was a champion, right? This is a guy who can achieve. Could he beat DDP? Could he beat Whittaker? Could he beat Izzy or any of these guys? Sure, but it's really hard to know how a guy that big is going to look trying to get down 20 pounds to another weight class while not really spending that time, because that's enormous amount of dieting. That's going to be road work. And you might be like, oh, he's a fucking samurai. He can do all that stuff. Yeah, he's got the mental kind of framework to deal with the struggle. That's true. He will not be deterred by hunger. He will not be deterred by fatigue in the same way that others potentially might be. But that doesn't mean he can, like, oh, I can just cheat the rules of performance on fight night because I have a samurai mentality. Like, that's a fun little story to tell everybody, but that bill's going to come due. I cannot believe that they think that what the task at hand is to just drain themselves 20 fucking pounds to get to a weight class and not actually work on the thing that's really holding him back, which is a improperly developed skill set. I know what some folks might say, which is, well, a lot of this is baked in. How much can you really change? That's true. That's true. A lot of this is really baked in. But there's great news. Alex Pereira just turned 37 years old. He doesn't have a ton of time left in the sport. He just doesn't. Like, as forgiving as 205 can be in its current state, and depending on age, and he is obviously tremendous. He's still got some time left at the top, no doubt in my mind. But, like, by 40, is he still going to be the champion? Probably not, right? And it might come sooner than that. Jiri is 31 years old. He's 31 years old. You have plenty of time to work on the craft. And that might mean you can't be in the biggest bouts that are available to you. I think that's really what's really driving this is what's a bigger bout, him versus, I don't know, him versus Johnny Walker or him versus Whittaker, him versus Izzy. Him versus Izzy is a much bigger fight. So I understand, like, you've got a short amount of time, get some money, blah, blah, blah. But I'm like, there's no guarantees that whatever draining you have to do to get down there is not going to have a severe impact. Moreover, you're taking a skill set that got you tuned up a little bit. I mean, he was able to physically overcome it at 205. Are you going to be able to physically overcome that with that much weight cutting going on? That seems uncertain. What seems like a much better idea, although it's a longer time horizon for reward, is to work on his fucking game. Work on his offensive wrestling. Work on some of his defense. Work on some of his cage cutting. Work on some of his setups. You can still leave him to be doing crazy shit, spinning stuff, crazy movement, whatever. Have him identify what ranges he can do that at. Have him identify what the footwork needs to be to bring some of that to life. There's the amount of room for improvement, both because of how deficient the skill set is and because of how athletic and young he is significant. Significant improvement. And it's not like he probably can't already beat some of these, maybe all of these other guys at 205. So you're like, oh, well, you want him to take an easy fight. I want him to take fights that get him to a place where he can be the best version of himself. I have a very hard time believing that's at 185. It is possible. I'm not ruling out he can't go down there and win. That's really not what I'm saying. But I feel like that's taking a shortcut to a much bigger problem. And it's not like this is 155 where there's really no easy fights. Dude, there's fucking easy fights for him, relatively speaking, at 205. There's fucking easy fights. I cannot imagine looking at a guy and being like, okay, the issue is not all of these very identifiable problems. The issue is you're just too big when you're actually not too big. We're just going to send you to, you're not for 205, but you're going to be fucking huge trying to get down to 1. I don't love it. I really, 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 really don't love it. I guess if their thought is he doesn't have a lot of time left in the sport and he just wants the biggest fights possible, then I understand that. That I understand, because then you're rolling the dice. You might be like, well, I don't know if we're going to win these, but there's a decent chance we could. And if we do, we're getting much bigger acclaim than just waiting on whatever Poatan is doing. But I don't get that. I don't get that at all. And you might be like, well, didn't Rich Franklin do that? But Rich Franklin, after the second loss to Silva, remember, these two fights were at middleweight. He then did some moonlighting at 205, but he was a middleweight. That's very different than being like not just a light heavyweight, but a big light heavyweight, and then going down to 185 when you've got these problems. Like, dude, Rob Whittaker won't be nearly as big, but he's going to find that chin. And if you're compromised, and Izzy's going to find that chin, and fucking DDP is a goddamn tank, like, they're going to find it, right? For a guy whose defense is like this, they're going to find it. I hope that chin holds up. Hope it holds up. Hope it holds up. You're going to need it. Josh Thompson mentioned on his podcast how him and BC really hit it off working together over the Diaz Masvidal card. Yeah, BC told me the same. He said he'd love to do some collaborations with MK in the future. Yeah, man. Well, I like those guys. Curious if you would be down with doing some crossover episodes with him and Big John. Sure. Oh, let's read this one then. Okay, here we go. Is Randy Couture on your bad side now? No, not at all. Like Joanna, where you can acknowledge their accomplishments and their skill set, but personally, it's not as no. I don't care. I don't care anymore. Hoping the canceled interview on MK was because of a good reason. No, we never got one. He canceled twice. Well, he didn't cancel. He just didn't show. But he didn't set that up. Like, it's not like I asked him directly. Like, I think that had come from PFL, and they're like, "Hey, do y'all want Randy?" We're like, "Yeah, we'll take him." And then he doesn't post. It's like, whatever. And then he does it again. it's like, okay. I mean, I don't care nearly as much anymore. That one, Ioana's just felt like I was the circumstances of how we got to that interview were very different. And also it was a very, very different time in my career. There are some similarities between the two, but like also who cares about that? She's retired and she's in the UFC Hall of Fame. Like, who gives a fuck anymore? People bring it up because I guess they care, but trust me, like day to day, I don't think about it. And in Randy's case, like I was agreeing to like a request. It wasn't like I was really seeking it, So I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. Darren Till told Ariel he didn't continue with the Chavez fight because of visa issues with getting into the U.S. Do you think or have any info on this because of his former ties to Daniel Kinahan? Could be. All those guys. I mean, that's why Tyson Fury can't get in here. All those guys with those MTK connections. Now, is that the case for Darren Till? I simply have no clue, but I don't think it's serving anybody who previously had any relationship with Daniel Kinahan to get into the United States now. It seems to be backfiring pretty substantially. Let's see. What is this one? Fans seem to ignore that UFC has lots of say when champs fight. Do they? They have a schedule. Max just fought a war and was dropped 2 months ago. Yeah, but not quite the same. He then went to Japan. He's in no condition to accept a fight. Seems unwise to rush a Topuria fight when he was dropped for the first time. Fans act like Max has signed a contract and Topuria is holding things up. It was clear UFC wanted Dricus to fight Izzy in Australia. Can't say Dricus is holding up the division. Shouldn't be expected to accept 300 short notice. It's clear UFC has held Islam back, didn't let him fight in summer of 2023 or March 2024. I don't know what all you're referencing or what kind of broader point you're trying to make is, but yes, when Ilya is like, "Oh, Max signed the deal," and when Max is like, "Ilya, you signed the deal," that is like your number one clue. Again, it's not dispositive, but whenever you see that, it tends to be the case that the UFC is the party that is not allowing that to move forward in the way that they want. That's not always true, but that tends to be. Sometimes it could be individual fighters. Sometimes the UFC can't make up its mind. They're trying to fill different roles for different purposes and different schedules. But that one, when they went back and forth like that, I'm like, oh right, this is a UFC issue in all likelihood. But in terms of like, oh, he shouldn't be back on the chopping block, I can halfway agree. Like, he won't be able to unless the commission clears it, and that gets back to our original question, which is, this is what I mean. It's like, according to current commission guidelines, I don't think he'll have any problems getting back there. But what you're noticing is that commissions have become what they call regulatory capture, where they're essentially, the policy is trying to be deferential to fighters so that they can make money from this practice. But as long as you're willing to be like, we're going to adjust the rules to make sure that there is more of a consideration in place to make sure guys can make money, that also means that promoters can make money. And so ultimately it's a sort of a deference to the business operating versus not. And as long as that is the posture of the commission, which is not to really be a watchdog, which is actually their job, but to kind of be a chamber of commerce facilitator, Well, that's how you get guys who, not necessarily max per se, although I guess we'll see, he's taking an enormous amount of damage, but that's how you get guys that have problems long term. That's how you get there. Shit like that. This is what I mean. The actual act of them fighting is really not my problem. It's the act of improper governance of the sport or limited. All right, there we have it. With that in mind, it's time for the super chat. Let's see what you guys have to say. Thanks to everyone who has contributed. All right. TN became a YouTube member. Thanks, bro. This donk, S225, just got my BJJ purple belt at 38. Congratulations. If my goal is self-defense, should I continue to black belt or dial back the BJJ and learn to strike? Should you be learning to strike at age 38? I think some level of striking at 38 is beneficial, but I don't know if I would give up jiu-jitsu completely for it at this point. Like, if you're talking self-defense, you don't need to be a elite level boxer. You just need a little bit of training, and you've already got you're halfway to black belt. I would keep going and maybe complement a little striking along the way. That should be more than enough for most self-defense situations. Like all these people being like, I need to go to the fucking gun range and blah blah blah. Like, dude, 99% of self-defense situations have nothing to do with that. A purple belt by itself should basically be enough. Again, there's going to be situations where that's not true, sure, but for most, that should be plenty. Should be. Hard boiled. Welcome to the party. Underdogs 247. UFC 100 happened 16 years ago today. Yeah, I saw. Did you cover the event live? So that was the first time I ever saw Bloody Elbows traffic explode. Can you explain to new fans the magnitude of the event? Prelims weren't on TV. That's crazy. I mean, prelims were a big issue back then, but you guys get it. This was, remember, we're talking the Ultimate Fighter happens in like 05, 06 is really blowing up. This was one of the first big, huge crown jewel events. There had been other ones before that, certainly, but you had GSP and Brock, and then the Ultimate Fighter was still relevant, and then the coaches coming off of that were on it. It was fucking huge, really big. Well past the 1 million mark on pay-per-views. Different era on pay-per-view, but you get the idea. It was big. And that was the first night I ever checked. Frank Mir was the first one. That's actually, no, I'm getting the story wrong. That's not quite true. It's when Lesnar fought Mir was when I really noticed it. So that's not quite true. But I didn't go full-time in the business until, I think, 2 years after that. Or maybe a year after that. It took some time, but that was a monster milestone. We pulled in at the time on Bloody Elbow a huge amount of traffic. So thanks to Brock. This guy, 1888. I hope that's not a racist thing. All right. Love the content, Luke. What did you think of Phil Daru's 150-mile ruck attempt? As a former fister myself, yes. I think he needed way more rucking volume. Yeah. So I've known Marines who have walked, I think it's 25 miles. I could be getting this wrong, so I have to double check this. But one end of the Panama Canal to the other in a day. But that's like 25-ish miles. Again, I have to double check some of this. And that took years to get ready for. So I think, first of all, Phil's a beast, and anything he puts his mind to, he'll eventually do. But I think he got 50 plus miles in, 51, 52, which is, by the way, fucking incredible. But he was going for 150. To get to 150, you have to put in, I probably would agree. I don't know all the volume he was doing. I was kind of following from afar on Instagram, but yeah, I would say honestly, like a couple more years of volume you would probably need, or at least another year. It takes a while. Mark says, first time super chatter. Well, thank you, Mark. I appreciate it. Great content here in MK. If you had to bet who is more likely to make it to 40, Ryan Garcia or Craig Jones? I don't even want to. Jesus. I mean, did we not get to this last week? How everything with Ryan Garcia is getting worse? Did we not do this? You see him having some kind of issue with the mother of his children, and allegedly maybe forcing his way into their home. Like, it's all headed in a very bad direction. And I even tweeted on like Saturday when he was at Diaz Masvidal. I'm like, I guess rehab's going to wait. People are like, you're such a fucking hater. No, you're such a fucking dumbass. That's what it is. If you're going to go to rehab, and especially if you have means, like he's got means, you just go. You do not stop. You do not collect $200. You go right to rehab. You just go right there. The fact that like he had put it off and is still like fucking around. Also, apparently him saying the N-word made MMA fighters want to train with him more. Like he does all that shit. He gets ostracized in boxing. Then he puts one video out being like, I'm going to learn how to wrestle. And like all these MMA fighters are like, yeah, I'll teach him. I'm like, funny that boxing was like, yeah, get the fuck out of the sport. And obviously it was mixed to a degree, but there's a lot of that. And then MMA was like, yeah, come on in. I'm like, that tells you a lot about like the fan bases. RM says, Perry Paul is next weekend. How are we feeling about it? Paul should win. I would love for Perry to pull the upset. Can't wait to see them match up. I think the pay-per-view is like a fucking huge amount though. Was it like, I think it's like $70 or $80. It's a lot of money. So that part I don't love. But I tell you what, I'm looking forward to it actually. Maybe Jake Paul in all likelihood Jake wins, right? But man, if Mike fucking upsets that would be incredible. Lee says, which movie is better, Gladiator or Transformers 1986? They're very different, but I'm going to say Gladiator. Transformers 1986 is not that money. All right. Thane says, are you excited for Deadpool 3? This is the one with Wolverine. I'll give it a go. I mean, am I like dying to see it? I'm not dying to see it, but I'll give it a go. Sure. I saw just for fucking, like after the gym, just relaxing. I saw, what is it? Godzilla and Kong, the New Empire, whatever. I mean, it's the worst movie ever made. It's really, I mean, I get that they're not trying to like, they're not trying to do the most impressive shit. And trust me, they succeed. That is, holy fucking shit, that movie is terrible. T-Ball Paul says, do you think the rumored Saudi boxing league will lower pugilist pay? I saw BC in Anaheim. Town reeked of gas station hot dogs for weeks. Without seeing exactly what their plan is, it's really hard to know. BC thinks that there might be some kind of model where they do like, they all stay separate for vast majority of the year. And then they have like that 5-on-5, like Queensbury versus Matchroom thing, a couple times a year. If that's the case, then I don't really think it lowers pay, but it really would depend on the details. I know everyone thinks like is boxing broken? Yes. It was broken on purpose. Trying to fix something that was broken on purpose. I don't think that's the idea that you think it is. Not you per se, but the proverbial you. Porco Rosso is worth a watch. I think this is one of the movies Miyazaki made. Also, with CJI in the mix, how do you think the landscape will change in regards to who people view as the best grappler in the world? I don't know if people think that CJI is going to crown the best grappler. I think they're looking for like a really fun tournament where there might be some of that. And you might be saying, well, aren't there going to be issues if ADCC got bled dry of talent? Yes. But I don't think ADCC is so badly affected that they can't still at least try to make that claim. So I agree that Craig has muddied the waters, but he's not muddying the waters on the idea that like the winner of this is that person. It's a little bit, there is some of that, but it's a little bit, it's not, that's not the express claim that he's trying to make. He's not trying to be like, it doesn't exist over there, it exists here. Because Gordon competes at ADCC. So like it would be a very difficult thing to actually argue that. Activate BPM says, have you seen the movie The Invisible Guest? Spanish film. I don't think I have seen it. I think you would really like it. I can't recommend it enough. It's top 3 all time for me. The Invisible Guest. I've not seen it. 9:15 a.m. says, is Stevenson Boo Boo Andre 2.0 high risk, low reward? Well, he's a little bit more than that because he might be like pound for pound good, where I don't think Andre is ever quite like that. Also, like the reality of going after everyone on social media is it is going to generate more attention for him, whereas Andre seemed invisible. That's different. Shakur is very much a prized commodity still. Like it seems like all indications are it seems like he's going to sign with Eddie Hearn. We'll see what Eddie can do. Nasir says, Luke, I've jumped on Colombia bandwagon to win the Copa. Let's go, dude. Did you guys see the game last night? Holy shit. do this. I've not been watching the Colombia team for very long, right? Circa 2009, right? As long as I've been knowing my wife. I'm no expert, and I've not been watching that long. But I can say this. For as long as I've been watching them, this is the best they've ever been. Now, they're not going to have Munoz because he got red carded, and that's a bit of a loss. I think they'll have Rios back. But this team is better than the 2014 team. Hamas is he's still got a lot of gas in the tank, at least for the Colombian national team. And fucking Lucho Diaz is a beast. They have so much chemistry. They're so complete. They're the best I've ever seen them. They're the best I've ever seen them. Their fans were a little bit fucking rowdy last night in Charlotte, but that team is legit. Grim says, Luke, what fight do you think sells more pay-per-view, John Stipe or John Poatan? John Poatan sells more. I think John Poatan sells more by a noticeable margin. Stipe has no wins over anyone left on the UFC roster. He has not turned in a significant performance of any kind. He is not a strong promoter. He has always been plagued by box office limitations. The argument that, like, because we're told that, like, as talking points, he's the best heavyweight in UFC history. And I'm not saying there's not some merit to that claim, although I think it's a little overstated. But whatever, even if it was true, like, what does the current, like, people who watched during the pandemic barely know who the fuck he is. It's just a completely overstated claim. John versus Poatan sells a lot more. Last Stand. If a well-known UFC fighter passed away in the octagon on pay-per-view main card, how would the UFC fans and mainstream media react? It would be very bad, but survivable. That is not true for the entirety of my time watching the sport when there was significantly greater. Dude, they don't care really about what happens in UFC. Now, this would bring a light, but they're doing all the things that you see other promoters do. Like Maxim Dadashev died at Oxon Hill, Maryland, here just outside DC, but it was a regulated show by the Maryland Commission. That's not to say that everybody did what they were supposed to. If a tragedy happens and something went wrong, but it didn't sink the relevant promotion at the time. It didn't chase fights out of Maryland. You're talking about something bigger than that. I understand, UFC, but at the same time, they obey all of the relevant regulations and go actually a bit above and beyond, since they go in excess of commission testing for performance enhancing drugs. I think it'd be bad, but I think it'd be very survivable. Guillermo says, Ilya said in a Spanish podcast that there aren't any PED use in the UFC, gullibility or culpability. Stupidity. I mean, that's just the most ridiculous fucking thing imaginable. Ryan says, what do you make of PFL putting on amateur fights on its cards? Kind of odd, no? Or just par for the course for all the weird shit they do? I think it's the latter. Part of it makes sense depending on what they're trying to do. If someone's got an amateur but they're a big name, if they're in a developing market, it's fine. But amateurs being on PFL shows is like the absolute least of their problems. What's up, Mark? Welcome to the party, bro. Terrence says, if you had to start a business that you enjoy and would be proud to leave it to your daughter, what would it be and why? I don't even have the faintest idea. I don't know. I had to leave it to my daughter. I want her to do whatever she wants to do. Like, she doesn't have to follow in my footsteps even a little bit. In fact, the less she followed in them, probably the better off she'll be, to be quite honest with you. Like, we've talked about this before. Do you want her to go into the military? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. That is, plenty of women go into the military and have fulfilling careers, but I know a lot who had to deal with outrageous amounts of shit, and I don't want that for her at all. So I want her to live her own life. I'll help her however I can, obviously, but like creating a business and leaving it to her, I don't even know where I would start with something like that. Dustin says, I saw your quote tweet about declining limb manipulation subs along with triangles. We'd love to hear you expand on this and share your overall thoughts. There were some stats that showed that basically, if you look at the changing in the last 10 years in submissions in the UFC, successful ones, what you're finding is that limb manipulation is declining. Omoplatas, arm bars, and that strangulations excluding from guard are increasing. rear naked chokes. Guillotine might be a little bit different. I don't think it's getting it from guard. They might jump to guard, but it doesn't originate from guard is more what I mean. Darces, anacondas, that kind of a thing. Those are all increasing. And that actually makes sense. In MMA, where the meta is to just hold on and escape and keep fighting no matter what, a limb manipulation is not the kind of guarantee that a choke is. A choke and a strangulation, even if they don't agree to go and tap, they'll just go out. So that actually makes a lot more sense. That plus you need to be in superior positions for the strangulation to work. And if it doesn't, if the rear naked choke fails, you're still on the back, you can maintain it. Whereas if the armbar fails, if they hit a hitchhiker escape, now you're underneath. So that has changed the equation pretty significantly. Zach says, any advice for me being 32 next week, going through a quarter life crisis, been laid off for a year and struggling to find purpose? I don't know. Oof, well, first of all, you didn't have to give me $10. I appreciate that, but you didn't have to do that. I appreciate it, though. A quarter life, I've been laid off for a year. I have heard that I don't have much advice on when people say stuff like this. I don't know what to do. I got married at 32, and when I was 32, this isn't even a brag because I'm obviously very far away from this anymore, but 32 was a great year for me. I got married that year. I was on national TV that year. It was a great year. I will say this. I know there's some of the job growth in the country is real and measurable, and that is a good thing. But I know that there's a lot of folks in white collar jobs who are struggling their ass off to find work, including very, very, very skilled people. Some of my wife's friends are in predicaments like that. And I can say that it is scary out there and difficult, and you are 100% not alone. Being out of work for a year, that's tough. I mean, that's tough. That's really, 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 really tough. And I wouldn't wish that on. I'm sorry it happened to you, and I wouldn't wish it on anybody. It can't last forever. And what I always say this to people, it's really uncomfortable advice, but it is so true in its basic nature. What is the alternative? It is okay to feel bad about it. It is okay to worry, certainly to an extent, and to be dismayed by the state of things. But the answer surely cannot be to just stop. So you have to, I think, have some understanding from a broader perspective. You are hardly alone. As difficult as it may be, you are hardly alone in your demo. And it's a symptom of the economy in which we currently occupy. And you just simply have to continue. You simply have to keep swinging the axe. There really is no alternative. As maddening and difficult as that might be, recognize that there's a lot of people who have the exact same thing about swinging the axe in the exact same age and the exact same probably work sector, maybe even the same town. There's a lot of this going around. So you have to keep swinging the axe, my friend. That's not the best advice in the world, but it's what I have for you at the moment. Prince says, after Charles versus Arman, I heard some say that Arman only escaped the round 1 choke because his shorts came off. Is that a fair character? So partly, he would have to get your hips past, and the shorts coming off, I think, somewhat facilitated it, but it doesn't mean he couldn't have done it without it. It's not like, that was never going to happen, but for the shorts coming off. The shorts coming off smoothed it a little bit, but it didn't make it. It wasn't an either-or scenario. It is possible that was the only way, but I'm not convinced it's the only way. You can definitely do that without it, even in a situation where it was that tight. Kyle says, what exercises do you do for your hairline? None, buddy. Genetics. Are you from the hairline increasing or forehead diminishing school, or just natty? This is natty, bro. I am thinning here, as you can see, but in terms of the hairline, this is just genetics, homie. That's why one reason why I'm partly a little bit apprehensive about doing TRTs, because I might lose all that, in which case it's like. Sketchy says, reaction to DA allegations for Ryan Garcia. Do you mean like the arrest for felony vandalism? I don't know what you're referring to. Sorry, I actually don't know what you're referring to. Felicidades por Colombia, Luke. I hope my Canadians can pull out a consolation win. I would love for them to win. Going to try to get to any games live in World Cup in 2026. I haven't even thought two seconds about it. Yeah, I would love to, but they fucking skipped what was FedEx Field. They skipped it because it's shit. And so now I'd have to travel to like Philly or something. I don't know. Maybe. Can you explain the move to having live interviews on show since swap to DK? Don't think they end up being as quality as stuff like the Brady talk on Wednesday. Trying some different stuff. We always wanted to do them on MK, but the previous production crew we were working with made it very difficult. And the current one does not. And now we can do them whenever we want. And you might be like, oh, that sounds crazy. Yeah, I know that sounds crazy. Me and BC were wanting to blow our fucking brains out about it. But now we're at a point where it like doesn't flow with the show as organically. So I'm not sure what the right answer is. We'll keep trying to see what works. We had a big MK meeting today, by the way, a big one. So, all right. Quigs says, once you finished your Miyazaki journey, I recommend Attack of Titan, feats 4 of IMDb's 10 highest rated TV apps. Creator also adds MMA influences. Duly noted. Duly noted. I did see Kiki's Delivery Service with my daughter. She loved it. She loved it. The movie Gladiator is good. Luke is correct. 50% great. Luke knows nothing. 28% mid, like a PFL. Okay, it's definitely not bad, and it's a little bit more than mid for sure. I couldn't believe how many people were fucking killing me on Twitter about that. I was like, you motherfuckers. I'm like, you guys know it's Spider-Man, right? Spider-Man. That's the level of movie where it's Spider-Man. It's good. I like Spider. Who doesn't like Spider-Man? I like Spider-Man. It's fucking Spider-Man, bro. Okay. Thoughts on the UFC media rights deal prediction? It feels like they know they could do better than what they have. ESPN's fortunes are waning. I honestly think a Netflix deal is very possible. I do. Chase says, I remember back in 2020, you said on an MK episode you'd favor Ankalaev to beat Jones outright, and we're certain of it. Do you still think that? No, I take all that shit back. I had a high opinion of him. Well, okay, that Jones at light heavyweight, the guy who I thought lost to Dominic Reyes. Okay, even then I would pick Jones. I would pick Jones. But Ankalaev tricked me. He tricked me. I thought that he was better than he was, and then the more I saw of him, I'm like, ugh. So no, I completely do not own up to that anymore. Change my vote. Fucking no. Terrible. Sorry, Attack on Titan. Always proofread, kids. I got what you meant. True or false, Henry says. Conor McGregor ends up fighting Michael Chandler at the Sphere in September. False. Jon Jones end up fighting Poatan in November. False. Canelo will fight Benavidez in May 2025. False. I think false on all of those. I love Big Red. I love Canelo. I don't know what the fuck he's doing. Henry says, are you watching Copa America? Dude, every day in this house. Plus, what are your thoughts on the crazy rumors that the Argentinian soccer organization may be I mean, guys, people being like, did you know Argentina's wild racist? I'm like, yeah. That's not like a secret. It's well known, bro. Super well known. I'm not saying like everyone there is. That's a little unfair, but oh yeah. Argentina is wild racist. Probably the most racist place. That's debatable, but I'll never forget. One time I went to dude. South America is racist in general. I'll never forget. One time I flew to Cartagena. I get into a cab, and it was me and my wife at the time. Tuki didn't exist, and the cab driver's taking us to our hotel, and he was asking us like, "How are you doing?" Blah blah blah. Obviously, you can hear my wife's accent, so he's like, "Oh, you're from Colombia." Blah blah blah. And out of nowhere, he goes, I think there had just been had launched in Colombia, like their version of BET. I don't know what it was called, but it was like their version of it. And he was like, God, I'm just to us in this cab in Spanish, obviously. He was like, God, I'm just so, I'm sick of these. He didn't use a slur. I think he just said blacks, which in Spanish, they kind of play with that a little bit. I don't like it, but it's a little bit more common to just call people by their race in that way. But then he's like, they're so uppity. They're so entitled. They just want da da da. And I'm like, dude, what the fuck? We just got in your fucking cab, dude. What the fuck are you like? What are you talking about? And that's a very small microcosm, a little experience of that way. But like, these are like, if there's any, like, there's so many nice parts to South America, but if there's one thing that is just one of the things that to me so bad about it, it is such a profoundly unequal place. And not just along racial lines, but although those too, but on any other number of lines, dude. Like either you have money there and you have the kind of life you want, or you are cooked deeply. The social mobility doesn't exist. It's a you might, oh, that's a problem here too. It is a problem here too. However bad you think it is here, in certain places it'll be just as bad, but like in general, statistically, it's not as bad. Whew, it's bad there. Is there still room on the Payton Talbott bandwagon? Yeah, get on, bro. His pre-UFC fights are online, so maybe consider a dissect on the evolution of his game. I'd have to look more into it, but I wouldn't be opposed, certainly. Darcy says, Luke, why, as an Australian asking this question, why do you think the U.S. has had such a decline in quality of presidential candidates? Jesus God. Did you guys see this survey? Who did the survey? I saw it today. It came out today. And I realized there's a bunch coming out, which is why I could not remember who it was. It wasn't like, who do you want, Trump or Biden or RFK? That's not what it asked. What it asked was people who identified as Republican or people who identified as Democrat. Do you consider your presidential candidate to be embarrassing? And then it asked, no matter what your party affiliation, do you consider Biden or blah, blah, blah. So the average American surveyed both Biden and Trump. Who do you consider them embarrassing? 67% for both of them, 67. Within the Democratic Party, I think it was something like for Biden, 37%. And then for Republicans, do you consider Trump embarrassing? It was like 33%. But, you're talking about like really high numbers for a completely unflattering description. It's so bad. I mean, it's a lot of problems. It's the primary system that we have is a huge problem, and how it rewards the deepest, most polarized reactions, particularly on the GOP side, and how it forces through contenders and candidates that way. That's a big problem. I think the all or nothing nature of our elections and the electoral college is a big problem. Not having ranked choice is a big problem. There's a number of mechanisms that create this and give it to us the way we do. But like that, we have candidates that the majority of Americans in either case, more than 2 out of every fucking 3 find embarrassing, and that the alternative choice is a fucking guy who didn't deny rape allegations and admitted to having brainworms. I'm like, oh my God. This is the best we can do. Oh my God. It's like I've never felt more despair for the future of this country than I do now. And I felt despair when Bush was in office, like true despair. But I kind of felt like there were ways in which it could be fixed and redeemed. I don't know anymore about that. No matter who comes to power, I don't know about that. Jacob, what's up, man? Welcome to the party. Devin, are you familiar with Diz Talk MMA, aka? I think there's 2 trash emojis. I think I've had various run-ins with him over the years. I haven't thought about him in a long time. Did he do something recently? I have no clue. Hard boiled. Will you be watching the Olympics? Yes. And if so, what do you like? Let's see. I'll watch some of the stuff that the Americans are competitive in, no matter what that is. But like what I'll focus in on, wrestling, obviously, I'll focus in on judo. Weightlifting is going to be a huge one. I want to see what Lasha Talahadze comes up with. Obviously, track and field is a ton of fun. I don't watch much of the archery. I don't watch much of the, that kind of kayaking and shit. I don't care about that. But swimming and gymnastics and the other ones I mentioned, those are all pretty big. Terrence, Why are people behind Ankalaev when all of his draws, no contest, are his own fault? Yeah, he's a dog. He makes errors a lot. Two Changs. The USADA drop off for certain fighters was so obvious, made me think those PEDs might be helping. Yeah, but that was temporary. Like they found ways around that. They always will. They have. Anthony says Project 2025 inflation laws made to help the 1%, politicians looking out for themselves and whoever pays them. I can't help but feel pessimistic. This will always be the same in the USA. How do you feel? I feel completely checked out from our political process in a way that has never happened in any kind of moment of my conscious walking life. That's what I feel like. I feel like I don't know how much can be redeemed or helped or fixed as long as I'll be alive. Perhaps longer than that, I don't know. But I just want to be able to retire somewhere comfortably and that my daughter has a happy life. And I don't care about, let's not say I don't care. That's not quite right, because there are people who need help. But I am as pessimistic about, not at a local or a municipal level, or even in certain cases at a federal level too. It's not a complete despair in the ability of government to help people who are in need. It is the broader way in which our federal government is constructed, being unable to actually meaningfully address problems in a timely way, and political gridlock making that impossible even on a delayed timeline. I guess that's where I'm at, if that makes sense. All right. Two Changs. Will Shakur Stevenson regret turning down $15 million from Aram? BC made a good point to me off air, and he doesn't think he will, because like the guy is so good that he'll eventually, like, this will all work itself out in the wash long term. I think there's a little bit of wisdom to that. And apparently he might have had hurt hands in this fight. I would say there's a good chance he could make more money long term, but I think it's a little bit more perilous than he realizes at the moment. Mordetsky, choose one or everyone you know gets full-blown AIDS. Follow and cover a year of pro wrestling or power slap? Oh, pro wrestling. Pro wrestling has drama. Power slap has nothing. There's nothing to it. If you've seen one, you've seen them all. Flash says, hello, Luke. How likely do you feel it is there will have been fixed fights in modern MMA North America? A virtual certainty. And in a major promotion in the last 20 years, a certainty. How often do you think it occurs? Rarely. I suspect that it occurs rarely. That it has happened is a virtual certainty. You just didn't know because it did a good job concealing it. But it's for sure happened. For sure. 100%. Billy says, Paddington 2, great movie or greatest movie? Haven't seen it. Probably a shit movie, though. Super Steroids. Take on Hill critiquing DJ for pointing why Hill lost. Without knowing what Hill said, I don't know. I mean, I'll just say this. Like, we live in an age where like athletes are much more part of this conversation. You know, when I was coming up, it was like people like me had all the microphones, and now the fighters have microphones, or the athletes, the players, they have microphones. And that's the way of the world, and that's actually just an inevitable thing. And in general, I think it makes the space probably a little bit better. But like, they're bringing, when they're still active, they're bringing their competitive fire and their like me against the world attitude into a space where they're the topic of conversation, and it just leads to really suboptimal results for them. Like, I don't feel like it's like, I don't think that Shakur Stevenson tweeting 300 times since losing or winning, is doing him a lot of favors. I mean, it is drumming up interest. There might be something to be said for that, like, as aforementioned, but in terms of his mental health, like, it can't be good for him. Whatever he says, oh, I'm going to, I'm being defiant. He sounds defiant. Like, is he really happy? I don't know if he's happy. Same with Hill. Like, does Hill look happy doing kind of some of this stuff? Again, I go back to the story where Kayla Harrison told me she had a Google alert that collected every day everything anyone ever said about her, and then sent it to her in a digested email. I'm like, that's a terrible idea. I honestly feel like if you're a competing athlete, it's up to them, whatever they want to do, and it's their lives. But my general view is, if you are currently actively competing as an athlete, you should have limited exposure to, like, as an analyst or podcast kind of guy. because it's going to play with you in a way that I don't think serves their interests. Lazy Bed, Luke, what's your favorite of the regional promotions? Is there one you feel produces the most? I like CFFC a lot. I have a lot of respect for CFFC. There's many good ones. LFA is a good one too, but I like CFFC. They've been a consistent quality promotion for as long as I've been involved in the sport. So shouts to CFFC. Carnage says, Luke, did you finish Shogun? No, I did not. I found this show absolutely incredible. Thanks for all your work. I kind of stopped watching after like 4 episodes. For no good reason, and other stuff happened, but I need to finish. Sang Jin says, do you think Foster versus Conceição was a robbery? Yes. I thought given the output and poor judging point of view ringside, I can see why Conceição won. Boxing Gems didn't think so. I don't know what Boxing Gems said. I did see that they didn't think it was a robbery. I disagree. I love Boxing Gems, but I disagree. Shouts to Boxing Gems. They do great work. But the problem, as I identified to BC, is if you guys have ever seen Diego Sanchez versus Martin Kampmann, go watch that fight. Diego efforts these flurries constantly, marching forward, and so much of it misses. Some of it hits, and some of it hits very demonstrably, but most of it misses. But he's just in his face, efforting. And he ends up getting the win. And you look at the stats, you're like, how the fuck is this possible? Like he was hitting nothing but air half the time. It's because they have to make judgment in real time based on what they think they see. And I honestly believe if you go and look at that, Conceição attempted like several hundred more punches than Foster. Foster's defense was super slick. You know, he was doing the whole bit, and he landed more. Conceição landed only 11% of his punches. But what's the one stat that stands out that you can see on the page? I'd be like, how would any of this be explained? That 700 number is staring you in the face. That's a big number relative to what Foster was doing. I think Foster was sub 500. So judging is a very imperfect way of evaluating fights. Super imperfect. It's not a very strong way to do it. It's the best that maybe we have, but it's not very good. Honestly, spamming offense, it works. I genuinely believe that it works. Alan W., you seem like a film aficionado. No, I just try to watch stuff that's better than others. I think South Korean films are the best in the market. The horror ones are really good. Any modern foreign film recommendations? I did that before. We had the Persian movie that was one, and then we had the Lebanese movie. Fuck was the Lebanese movie where The Insult. The Insult is a favorite of mine. I really like that movie. Full Metal Pants. Luke, what percentage of the fan base do you think illegally streams the sport 100% of the time? A double-digit number. Christian says, who would you like to see fight the winner of Sean and Merab? The winner of Corey and Umar? What about Ilya and Max? That's a little tougher one because there might be a case for a rematch there. I don't have a clear, it's got to be Volk. Doesn't have to be. Phil Knight has given the University of Oregon over $1 billion. Will he ever see Oregon Ducks win a football title? No. Bloomberg gave Johns Hopkins $1 million for tuition at the medical school. Seems like a smarter investment. Daniel says, Luke, Lopan versus Shang Tsung. Who takes it in what round? The last one. Also, which character is less offensive? Shang Tsung. There's just less personality to him. Jackson says, as I get older, I feel that I have less time to distribute my training. Would you recommend focusing on powerlifting, strongman, or boxing, MMA? I love both of these, but need to pick a lane to focus on. I can't in any way decide that for you. If I'm getting older, I'm thinking more about my long-term health, and none of what you have listed is good for your health. So you just need to figure out which one you like the most and then call it a day. Yeah, that's going to be a tough one. Oops, hang on. There we go. All right. Mua says, can you speak a bit about Islam's cage IQ? It seems like his decision-making gets lost amid his skills. Best MMA decision maker since GSP, in my opinion. I'd have to review the tape. That's a little strong for me. I think I will say this: he never seems surprised, which is sort of what you're driving at. He rarely gets hit clean, but that's not like part of that is high fight IQ. Part of that's good prep, but a lot of it is he's got this careful range managed style where he's able to accrue a fair amount of information before he ever has to act on it. So there's a few factors involved in that. I think they train very specific to what the opponent might give them because the base of skill is very high. And he's well-rounded at this point. And he's got a very cautious style, I would actually argue. And that enables him to make good decisions. That's not quite like Jones, where Jones can just look at a situation quickly and make a decision. Actually, Jones, to me, at his peak anyway, had a much higher fight IQ. On Pereira moving up, why does debate skip straight to him facing John or Tom? Why not an easy entry fight like former welterweight Gelton Almeida? So you could do that. You could do that. But Scott Coker, who ran Strikeforce, was a very, very effective promoter. And one thing they realized was you don't like. Yes, if you really wanted to have him go through the contender queue, you could, but he'll probably get tripped up along the way. There's nothing wrong with that. You can do that. But what are potential rewards if you go the other path? Now, there's downsides to that too. They're skipping the queue. However, you get a big fight out of it. You get a more winnable fight out of it. It could be a very surprising result. You just get these more dynamic, interesting results at times. It's not to say you should always do that, but that's why people are skipping it. He seems like an extraordinary fighter doing extraordinary things. Let's take extraordinary steps. Afifi says, first UFC in Colorado since 2018. Weren't the UFC upset about Colorado sanctioning one rule set and judging? Yes. They seem to have gotten over it. I don't know what happened, but remember, they were like, yeah, as long as they're going to regulate, allow promoter, because remember, they didn't substitute the 10-point must system for the one system. They said promoters can use either one. And UFC didn't even like that, but it appears that they have backed off from that now, which is mercifully, I think, the right call. JP says, Luke, I came across an old video of yours, serious, going off on how stupid Skip Bayless was talking about Conor Nate fight. Hilarious. Yeah, I've got some old videos up there. I don't know how many of them are any good anymore, but thank you for watching them. Greg says, really liked your take and points equating Gladiator to a superhero movie rather than simply a revenge movie. That being said, have you seen Monkey Man? No. You're like the fourth person who's recommended this. I've not seen it, but so many people have told me it's good. Johnston, play matchmaker for a second, all right? What fights do you give Anthony Smith and Roman Dolidze? Dolidze versus Imavov is fine. Smith, I don't know. Walker? You could redo the Ozdemir fight, maybe? Something like that? Johnston, W in the chat for one of the best award-winning MMA media figures around. We love you, guy. Well, thanks, dude. I appreciate that. Very nice of you. Trick says, did you see Cam and Mace's response to Shakur? Yes. Yo. Oh, my God. Dude, they went after him. And listen, it's not to say that like every part of what they said I agree with. There's lots where I was like, yeah, they're being mean. It's a little much. But like, dude, Shakur going out there and just poking everyone in the eye who had nothing, if it wasn't like relentlessly positive, it doesn't serve his long-term interests. I don't think he needs to change his style for Cam and Mase, but Cam and Mase are basically a reflection of what drives consumer sentiment in the sport. Having an understanding and appreciation for that is probably important. And then, like, going after like what they've accomplished, like, dude, when I lived through the peak of Mace's popularity, and I lived through the peak of Cam'ron's popularity. Mace's was much higher. Dude, when Mase was on top of the world, like, he was the biggest guy in music, or pretty close to it. He was huge, certainly in pop music. He was when MTV mattered, he was all over MTV, all over the radio, all over the cover of the magazines. Everywhere you went, blowing everything up. That was part of it. And then Cam'ron, to me, was a little bit more street and less accessible to that kind of a demo. Purple Haze is one of, I'm a fan of Horse and Carriage, but like, as like when I think about, what's the thing I go back to is like Cam's body of work. Purple Haze is one of the best albums I've ever heard, and it holds up to this day in my judgment. Granted, I'm a fucking, white guy in his 40s, but take the Pepsi challenge, see what you think about it. Purple Haze is an incredible piece of work. And, you guys do you remember his diss track on Jay-Z? How's the king of New York, excuse me, how's the king of New York wearing chancletas with jeans on and you 40 years old? Remember that? What's the song called? You Gotta Love It. You Gotta Love It. He's also got a song with, it's not Tech Nine. It's called Triple Up. Oh my God, dude. Cam'ron on Triple Up is ridiculous. So, it's okay to be like, hey, I didn't like their opinions. Dude, they have produced some absolute fucking magic in the studio. Magic. And like Purple Haze was life-changing for me. I don't say that very lightly. Super Steroids says, Hill basically said DJ can't understand his style. Did he? That's probably not true. You know what I mean? That's probably not true. But, people get bitter at fighters for saying like crazy things. It's what they do. They believe crazy shit because they have to go do crazy shit. Like doesn't mean you have to honor and like agree with it, but this is what they do. All right, broskies. Thank you so much for watching. I greatly appreciate it. We'll put the podcast up tonight. We'll have a lot of fun. I don't know if there's going to be UFC Denver stream or not this weekend. We might see how it goes, but just the same, I'll have some content for you. Love you guys so much. Until next time, stay frosty and have a good weekend. Bye. Oh, wait.